All right, let's get right into it. We're here to talk about a pretty sophisticated supply chain attack that's been hitting the NPM ecosystem. It's called CanisterWorm. This is a critical threat briefing, especially for you folks on dev and security teams, because it uses some novel techniques for command and control and has some nasty worm-like behavior.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with an overview of the campaign itself. Then, we'll dissect the attack piece by piece. We'll spend some time on its really unique C2 mechanism and then talk about how it spread and who it hit. And of course, we'll wrap up with the important stuff, how to find this threat and more importantly, how to harden your defenses against it.
First up, the campaign itself. And right off the bat, I want to be clear. This is not your typical typosquatting attack. No, this was a compromise of legitimate, trusted NPM publisher namespaces, which, makes it a whole lot more dangerous.
So the core threat here was a full-on takeover. The attackers managed to get publishing access to real packages that people were using. They then ripped out the legitimate code, dropped in their malicious payload, and just republished them. They were basically abusing the trust that developers already had in these packages. We're calling it CanisterWorm because of its most interesting feature. It uses an Internet Computer Protocol, or ICP canister, for its command and control. Think of an ICP canister as a smart contract living on the Internet Computer blockchain. Using this for C2 is frankly a pretty novel technique, and it gives the attacker a ton of flexibility. All right, let's get into the weeds here. We're going to trace the anatomy of this attack, walking through its entire life cycle, from the moment it gets installed to how it digs in and achieves persistence on a host. Okay, so the attack kicks off with a post-install script, a super common entry point as we all know. But from there, it gets clever. It establishes persistence by setting up a systemd user service. And that's a really smart tactical choice, because it doesn't need root privileges, which makes it way stealthier. But it still ensures the malware starts right back up with every new session or reboot. Once it's active, the implant just starts phoning home to its C2.
Looking at the research, it seems like this was a phased attack. The early versions felt more like a staging framework, almost like a dry run to test their mechanics. But the later releases, they were fully weaponized with a standardized service name, pgmon, and an embedded Python dropper, basically ready to go for a much wider deployment.
All right, now for what I think is the most innovative and concerning part of this whole thing. Its command and control mechanism. This is really what sets CanisterWorm apart from the pack. So the attackers used this ICP canister as what you can basically think of as a rotatable dead drop. It's like a secret mailbox in a public park. The implant on the infected machine knows exactly where that mailbox is, and it just checks it every so often for new messages. The attacker, meanwhile, can change the message inside, in this case a URL pointing to a second-stage payload, anytime they want, without ever having to touch the malware that's already running on the victim's computer.
And this is the real kicker. This design gives the attacker incredible long-term flexibility. They can dynamically swap out their payloads, they can go quiet for a while by pointing the URL to a harmless site, or they can launch entirely new attacks, all without ever having to republish the malicious NPM package and risk getting caught.
Okay, so we understand the implant now, but how did it spread across the NPM ecosystem? Well, this is where the worm part of its name really comes into play.
Now, to be clear, the worm component wasn't self-propagating in the traditional sense. Instead, the initial implant was designed to steal developer credentials, specifically looking for NPM publishing tokens. Once they had those tokens, the attackers used a bundled script called deploy.js to programmatically take over and republish every other package owned by that same developer. It created this rapid, worm-like spread that they controlled.
And it was highly effective. In total, we saw over 29 legitimate packages get compromised and republished with this malicious payload.
They were also pretty targeted. The campaign really focused on two main publisher namespaces, a big cluster of packages under @emilgroup and another package @teal.io/eslinkconfig. This shows they were thinking strategically, trying to get a broad impact by hitting entire toolsets that developers rely on.
So who's at risk here? Well, the primary targets are developer workstations and, of course, automated CI/CD pipelines. It's especially dangerous for those running on Linux, since the malware's whole persistence trick relies on systemd. This makes those Linux-based build servers a particularly high-risk environment.
Okay, this is the actionable intelligence part. How do you actually go hunting for this thing on your own developer machines and in your build servers? Let's walk through the specific indicators of compromise, the forensic breadcrumbs this malware leaves behind that your security team needs to be looking for right now.
Okay, here are the key things to look for in your threat hunt. First, you need to audit for a systemd user service named pgmon.service. Second, look for the Python payload itself, which it drops at this path, /.local/share/pgmon/service.py. Third, get into your network logs and search for any outbound connections to the hard-coded ICP canister URL. And finally, check the temp directory for a couple of files, plog and .pg_state. If you see any of these, you have a problem.
Now, detection is obviously critical for incident response, but prevention is always the name of the game. So, let's talk about the single most important thing you can do to secure your build pipelines against this kind of attack.
Look, the most effective defense you have is to block the entry vector. This whole attack worked because it pushed a malicious patch update that got automatically pulled in by any system using floating version dependencies. So the critical countermeasure is strict version pinning. You have to enforce the use of lock files and make sure your package.json configs pin every single dependency to an exact vetted version. That's what stops these malicious updates from ever getting into your build pipeline in the first place.
This incident, CanisterWorm, it's not a fluke. These kinds of supply chain attacks, the ones that compromise trusted publishers and abuse dependency resolution, they are the new normal. So the key takeaway here is to treat this as a wake-up call. Use the intelligence from this attack to go audit and harden your own dependency management and security posture right now. Because the real question isn't if the next worm is coming, but whether you'll be ready for it.